We found in a previous film that natural law theory is best described as a deontological, that is law-based theory that derives from a Greek teleological worldview where the end, or telos, is what defines the good. And the end in Greek philosophy is eudaimonia. That is the one thing, says Aristotle, that is good in itself. What criticisms can we make of this theory? Well, the Greek idea was partly that there were not just ideas of rationality and rational human nature, but an idea of classes, stratifications in society. So you had the aristocrats at the top and the philosophers, and at the bottom you had the slave class. And it seems in the ancient world they saw nothing wrong with that kind of classification. And that was indeed a view adopted by the slave owners and the members of the Confederate Parliament of the 1860s in the United States, where Andrew Jackson stood up and gave a speech that became known as the Cornerstone Speech, which argued that the whole cornerstone of the US Constitution had been a mistake, that to found your Constitution on the idea of equality ignored the natural distinction between different types of people, in this case, slave and free, black and white. That shows us one of the dangers of natural law theory, and that is that we can produce a very arbitrary and immoral way of classifying different human beings and different types of human being. Extension of that is a second criticism, and that is the view that there isn't in fact one human nature at all, be it a rational human nature or some other human nature. In fact, there are many types of human nature. For example, we find in the gay debate that in Roman Catholic thinking, if you go back to Roman Catholic encyclicals like Humanae Vitae, which was sent round in 1967 as a letter to the churches, we find that homosexuality is described as a state of being intrinsically disordered. Now, if you're a gay person, to be described as intrinsically disordered in your very nature, it is quite a rude and unpleasant way of somebody classifying you as a human being. And of course, it only makes sense if you're disordered against some objective standard of normality, or objective standard of order. And that is exactly what happens with natural law. If you set the interpretation of natural law up as the norm, as the objective norm that we judge other things by, then anything else that doesn't fit the norm becomes a form of disorder. And for this reason, the Roman Catholic Church has consistently argued against legalizing gay marriage, for example, giving any encouragement to homosexual genital acts, and so it goes on. And we see the origin of that classification and condemnation exists in natural law theory itself. A third criticism could be that natural law theory is very anthropocentric. That means it's very based on a human view, a human perspective of things, and a perspective of morality that only considers human beings as being of moral worth. What about the environment? And what about animals? Now, in modern Christian theory, much has been made of the interpretation of Genesis, which uses the word stewardship. But also in Genesis, there is the idea of us having dominion or power over the world, and God, in part of the curse in Genesis 3, tells Adam that his job is going to have to be to pull up the weeds and to manage the environment. So what we actually have in Christianity for a lot of its history is a very weak environmental ethic, really a lack of adequate concern, we might say, of the implications of our behavior on the wider environment and indeed the animal kingdom. For example, Thomas Aquinas in the 13th century said that animals were naturally there for the uses of people. They are our slaves in a sense. They are there for our use, and we can kill them, we can be slightly unkind to them, etc., and do what we like. because that's what they're there for in the natural order of things. And similarly, the whole state of the environment could be seen as instrumental to human goodness, to human welfare, rather than to be seen as intrinsically good in itself and having a sort of right to be protected and its balance preserved. So if we take a document, again from the Roman Catholic Church, like Veritatis Splendor, which was an encyclical issued in 1995, we find a very clear exposition there of natural law theory. But it tags on as one of the precepts, one of the primary precepts, in fact, a kind of extension of preservation of life, where they talk about cultivation of the natural resources of the world. And that cultivation, that use by human beings of the natural resources of the world is actually a very capitalist, you might say, view of how we should view the environment. The environment, implies Veritatis Splendor, is there for our use. It's not there because it is intrinsically beautiful and intrinsically of value just because it is there, or if you like, because it is created by God. So what you get from natural law theory to start with is no environmental ethic, no emphasis on animal rights, and then in the 90s perhaps a weak environmental ethic. And it's running in a sense to catch up with the movement that is arguing today in ethics that environmental concerns should be protected and guaranteed by viewing the environment as having intrinsic worth in itself.